So today I was supposed to be working on my CraftyCon theory, but Mob decided instead of that they were going to release a massive new ARG update for Chapter 3, and of course, well, I had to start investigating. If you haven't seen today's news, we finally got Catnap's description. We've been waiting for this one since every day this week Mob have been releasing a new smiling critter, and today, as most people expected, would be Catnap's. But once we got Catnap's description, people soon realised there was something just a little bit off with this one. First of all, his scent, lavender, was just a little bit out of line. It wasn't quite aligned properly. Now this might have been nothing, but people quickly realised that in the top left, there were these series of dots. Using some decoding magic, they realised that these dots spelt the word omen. Putting that together with the word lavender being slightly out of line, the talented people in Discord very quickly came up with a new password, Lavender Omen. Now, of course, today there was a brand new folder, and once this one was opened with the new password, we found all of these new files. These ones were very interesting. They bring a whole new character, Gerard Lockhart, an investigator. We'll talk more about him later. There's a lot of information here about Theodore and Catnap too. We'll talk about all this at the end of the video though, because before that, I want to talk about the brand new CCTV images. You see, not only was this new folder discovered, but we also discovered that the CCTV has been updated and we've now got 3 brand new scenes to look at. This is all very similar to what happens between Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, and I'm going to talk about how that might be a little bit more relevant later as well. So if we look through these new CCTV images, there are 3 of them, and this one is probably the most interesting. Here you can see what looks like another bedroom, but in the top left corner you can see what is pretty clearly Catnap. Not only can you see his eyes, which look very similar to the eyes we see at the end of the Chapter 3 trailer, but if you look more closely you can also see what looks like his moon pendant here as well. Why Catnap is staring into the camera like this I'm not entirely sure, but it's kind of creepy. Now if you look around the room, there isn't a ton of things to find just yet. You can see this image which looks like another one of the creepy children. We've seen plenty of these now in the trailers and teasers for Chapter 3. Over here you can see another hole, which I actually think this is a huge hint, by the way. I think this is a hint that Catnap, or one of the toys anyway, is going to pop up out of the holes in the ground and we're going to have to be very careful. Kind of like how the alien pops out of vents in the ceiling in Alien Isolation. I think it's going to be something similar to that. But these holes are absolutely everywhere in the teasers and we can always see these cat claw scratch marks. So I definitely think these are going to be little hidey holes that Catnap will pop out of. So maybe we have to watch out for that. Now I have looked around the doorway, I've looked in pretty much every corner of this image to see if anything else is moving or if there's anything else to see, and well, I can't really see anything. There are some sparks over on the right here, but to be honest, that could just be anything. The factory is in a massive state of disrepair. We know that there's no one going around doing maintenance or anything like that, so realistically this could just be a light switch or it could be anything. But yeah, Catnap is very interesting, but he's just kind of sat there doing nothing. But I actually think that potentially these scenes could change. Now, if you remember in between Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, we did get these, again, 3 CCTV scenes. And in each of these 3 scenes, at first they didn't really show anything. They were just kind of empty scenes. But over time they changed and it eventually told a story which led up to the big reveal of Mommy Longlegs. In fact, we actually saw Mommy Longlegs' arm before we ever knew who she was. I actually thought this was a grab pack to begin with. So there's a good chance that Mob could do the same thing here, and knowing that the CCTV was changed right before the release of Chapter 2, I'm wondering if this means once again we are just very, very close to Chapter 3. Now the second scene is also very creepy. We've seen this corridor before. We've seen this one with the Heretics poster. Now I've already talked before about the idea that this is really weird that these look like prison cells. You can see that there are beds in here and these doors with bars on them. It seems very weird that they would have essentially a prison in an area that's designed to be an orphanage. But then again, knowing what happens down here, knowing all the experiments and knowing just how evil Playtime Co. is a company, there could be a number of reasons why they have these cells. Are these cells for the experiments, or are these cells for orphans who misbehave, or maybe even both? Honestly, who knows at this point, but I still think it's kind of creepy that we have these cells down here. What makes this one particularly interesting is that this one is much longer than the others. These are actually video files and you can watch them. And if you watch this one, it's way bigger than the other ones. It's way longer. Now, if you actually stick around and watch this one all the way through, you will eventually see a small version of Bobby Bearhug crawling through this corridor. Now, this is already pretty interesting and creepy. This is a confirmation that we are going to see at least some of the smiling critters in their small form. Now, we don't know if this Bobby can grow like the Catnap is hinted to be able to do. Either way, this is pretty concrete proof that we are going to encounter some of the smiling critters in a small form, which could be a further hint that we'll see smaller Huggies come to life too. But even if not, I do think we are potentially going to see the entire cast of the smiling critters in Chapter 3, and I really do hope they all have their different little personalities. But even if they don't, it does seem like there are going to be so many dangers and threats in Chapter 3. We are going to be kept on our toes the entire time. Not only do we have to look out for the giant Catnap who can put us to sleep, jumping out of the floor, but we also have to watch for the small ones too. These ones could hide anywhere. They could be hidden around corners, under little piles of toys. They could pop out of toy boxes. Realistically, this could be a huge new gameplay mechanic for Chapter 3, and I'm really excited. Now, just before we move on to the next scene, one final thing I want to say about this one is, as I said earlier, these rooms look like cages or prison cells, and I do find it very interesting that this third one is left open, kind of hinting possibly that something that was kept here or somebody has escaped. And yeah, maybe we'll find out who that is in Chapter 3. But the third one is probably the least interesting of them all, or is it? Now, this is not the first time we've seen this scene. The scene with these machines that look like they're going to be some sort of platforming part of the game. This is the second time we've seen this. And really, I've looked through every part of this image to see if I can find anything interesting, and I can't. And that in itself, I think, is interesting. Now, let me go over some of the things that I potentially found before I talk about why that is really, really important in my opinion. Now, first of all, I found this over on the wall, which I thought could potentially be Huggy's arm, but it's not. It's just a pipe. If you look at the still image that we got, you can see very clearly that it's this pipe here. Second of all, if you look at these machines when they lower, it does kind of look like something is in this one. It looks like this one is hollow and there is something in there, but it doesn't really show anything that it could be. It looks like a small toy maybe, but I don't really know what that is supposed to be showing. If it is showing anything, it could even just be a reflection. I honestly don't know. Which again makes me wonder, why have we been given this scene now twice, and in both of those times I could not find anything significant or anything interesting? And I think, and this is just a theory, but I think that this area or this scene is actually going to be an important one. I think this is Mob subtly hinting that something here is going to happen in the actual game, and it's going to be something important. Perhaps we're going to meet a character here like we met Mommy in Chapter 2, or perhaps there's going to be some sort of story detail here that we definitely shouldn't miss. And Mob definitely know that there is something important about this corridor. Maybe it's just the parkour mechanics that they're trying to show off and they're very proud of it, or maybe it's because they know that we're going to have a surprise here, something that we're going to remember, and they're trying to tease us with that, but they don't want to spoil it because it's going to be very, very interesting. Again, it's just a theory, but it does seem really weird that they keep showing off this corridor with realistically nothing in it. But as I said, there isn't all that much to see in these 3 CCTV images just yet. Yes, the Catnap is pretty cool, but that's really obvious. It's really in your face. And in the last CCTV ARG that we got, there were things to find. Well, I guess there were updates to those images that we could find, so we kept having to go back and checking. And I really do hope that they do the same thing with this one, so that we can find some more interesting things right before the release of Chapter 3. But also alongside these CCTV images, we also got a brand new folder. Now, I haven't covered the entirety of the ARG on this channel just because there's just so much of it, but I do want to cover this update because I do find there's some really interesting things in here. Now, first of all, we get this little message here that talks about the Catnap dolls. Now, they say that they don't smell like lavender and the stuff coming out isn't the usual clear mist, but a smoky red. Now, in this small message, there is a bunch that you can unpack. First of all, this implies that this particular staff member had no idea about the red mist being used in the playcare area, and we already know that plenty of the staff were kept in the dark. We know, for example, that many of the staff didn't know about the Bigger Bodies initiative, for an example. It was very much a need-to-know basis. But it's also really interesting that these dolls were eventually infused with the red gas. Now, was this just an accident, or was there something more to it? Did the dolls, for example, did they do this? Did Catnap do it? Did one of the children do it? Did 1006 do it? Or was it another staff member trying to get the news out? You know, we already talked about the idea that some of the staff were trying to expose Playtime Co. We know Rowan Stoll was going to do that before he died. So there's a good chance that other staff members were trying to do the same thing as well. And this could be a way to do it, but it seems like a really nasty way to do it, to put it into children's toys. And we can see here that parents were complaining to their customer service team that when they bought these Catnap dolls, that it was doing some weird stuff. to their children, which again, we know Playtime Co. are happy to do for their orphans, but I don't think they would want to do that for their customers. It seems like it would be a really bad idea to bring light to their misdeeds, so to speak. So that's also really interesting, but the idea that it got all the way up to the factory floor without anybody realizing, and with those staff having no idea what's going on, just seems typical for Playtime Co. at this point. Now in the files in the ARG, we get introduced to a brand new character, Gerard Lockhart, and he's described as being an investigator. Now this already seems a little bit weird. Why would Playtime Co. have an investigator? If that was somebody from outside the company, that would be the last thing that they would want. They wouldn't want anybody around their secret research, except he doesn't exactly seem bothered by it. In fact, it seems like he's well aware of all this research and honestly doesn't faze him. So either this was somebody hired from within the company, somebody who already knows about it all, or this could even be a more sinister explanation and could say that Playtime Co. had influence in other departments outside of the company, for example, the local police department. This could even explain why the factory has been untouched for 10 years after it closed, but that's a theory for another day. Either way, Gerard was investigating what he calls an influencer, somebody who was influencing Theodore, somebody who was telling him to do things. Now, I do find it interesting that Playtime Co. hired this investigator or used this investigator for this purpose, but it also makes a lot of sense if you think about it. We already know that there were moles within the company. Rowan Stoll is a good example of that. There were people that wanted to leak this research. There were people who wanted to shut the whole thing down. And I'm sure that Playtime Co. would have hired people like this to find them and root them out and probably feed them to Boxy Boo. Or as we've already theorized, put them into other toys as well. Either way, get rid of them. But if you read through these as well as the other ones that we got previously, you can kind of see a story that happened here. 1006 was asking Theodore to find files and also steal a grab pack. Now in my CraftyCorn video that I haven't released yet, I actually talk about this whole idea. The idea that 1006 needs help getting around this factory, and it makes total sense. This whole factory is a labyrinth. It's really hard to get around and you need multiple grab packs to do it. This actually is all by design. It makes sense. It's like a keycard system, except instead of keycards, it's grab pack hands. All this really does is make sure that no one singular person can get to every area of the factory. You're only allowed to go to your designated areas, and this allows Playtime Co. to have complete control over where each employee goes. For example, if you're somebody who needs to go into the red hand area, you can, but you can't go into the green hand area. If you want to go there, you have to go with somebody qualified. It makes total sense to me, but this would make it very difficult for things like 1006 to get around the factory without help, and this is why he convinced Theodore to take 2 green grab packs. Now, this is also very interesting because if this whole thing is 1006 as it's hinted to be, that means that 1006 can use the grab packs, which means he does probably have a rest of a body somewhere, it's not just an arm. But what's really interesting about this whole situation is that at the end of it, when Theodore gets electrocuted, presumably by the green grab pack hand, this influencer, again probably 1006, actually returned him to the staff, went out of its way to return Theodore, blowing its own cover. Now why would it do this? Well again, if this is 1006, this influencer, it makes total sense. We know that 1006 is called the Savior, and Mob do seem to be hinting that 1006 really did care about these orphans. Again, potentially more evidence that this is Elliot Ludwig. But either way, I just find it fascinating that 1006 was seemingly trying to escape this factory, but turned back at this last moment to do the right thing. Again, says a lot about his character. Now, this is something that is also brought up in the cross-department report, which is a couple of years later. Now, here we get 3 excerpts. We get one from Harley Sawyer, one from Stella Graber, and one from Leif Pierre, and these are all basically a report on what is now pretty much confirmed to be Theodore being transformed into Catnap. Now, all of this is talking about 1188's procedure and his introduction to the playcare. This is the idea that they are turning him into a bigger body and then making him work in the playcare. This is the whole point of the Bigger Bodies initiative, and it's very clear here what Catnap's job is. Now, there are a lot of things to unpack in this one. The idea that Harley Sawyer says he's a resounding success, rivaling that of even 1170, pretty much confirming that Huggy Wuggy was a security measure, as many people have already theorized. But also we can see that Stella Graber doesn't seem to be a big fan of this. Now, there are 2 ways you can interpret this. One, Stella Graber really does care about these children and doesn't want this to be happening, and she has reservations. Or 2, this is all part of her ploy, part of her cover. Again, I've said there is a good chance that Stella Graybear isn't as kind and benevolent as she first appears, but that's just a theory. You can note at the end she says she has reservations, but at the same time, she thinks it's a positive impact, so she's not exactly fully against the idea either. But finally, we have Laith Pierre, the most paranoid one, or perhaps the most sensible one if you think about it. But he talks about the idea that 1188 has calmed down. There was problems with erratic behavior after the experiment, but they've been ironed out, which is something very, very interesting. And also the idea that 1188 follows 1006 around like a lost Poppy. Now, if 1188 is Theodore, which is the most popular theory at the moment, this would make total sense. 1006 convinced Theodore to work with him when he was a boy, and now he's convinced him as a toy. But it also leads into the idea of this whole cult aesthetic, the whole 1006 has saved us mentality that we've seen from the beginning. It definitely seems like a lot of these toys come to almost worship him, and well, again, there's so many things that we could talk about that in another video. I do like that Laith Pierre ends his statement by saying that Catnap may be docile now, but he's also highly impressionable, especially to anything the prototype says or does. Interesting there, anything the prototype says, which massively hints that the prototype can talk, which I find very cool because we haven't actually heard anything of the prototype yet. Potentially in Project Playtime, but we don't know if that definitely is the prototype talking. And then also the idea that the prototype is being built up to be much more capable. We've only seen him as an arm, and we only see him as an arm in this drawing as well, but it seems like the prototype does have a full body, can get around, can use a grab pack, and can even speak. So I think we've only just seen a snippet of the full beast, if you will. But yeah, there are so many things that you could unpack and theorize over with these. These are just my first impressions, and like I say, I do really hope that we get some updates to these CCTVs. I really don't think this is where Mob are going to leave it. I don't think they would just show these 3 CCTV images with not all that much to find. I think we are going to see probably a little bit more before Chapter 3 releases, which again seems like it's very soon. Anyway, I hope you did enjoy the vid. If you did, let me know down in the comments below what you thought of it. Leave the video a like if you liked it, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.